call the meeting to order. This meeting will be audio and video recorded. It's the December 17th, 2014 meeting of the Economic Community Development, Housing and Land Use Committee. All members are present except for Ms. Ann DeWitt Brooks. Present are myself, Councilor Jesse Adams, Councilor Ryan O'Donnell, Councilor Gina Louise Sierra, Councilor Paul Spector, and Kevin Lake. Is there any public comment? Appears to be none. Is there a motion to approve the minutes of October 7th?
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Abstain.
Any opposition? One abstention. So now we'll move to 14.245 ordinances regarding plastic bag reduction, which includes the ordinance regarding solid waste reduction and environmental protection and its accompanying penalties and enforcement ordinance. Did everyone get the email I sent out today?
Yes.
I'll start by explaining those, the proposed amendments proposed by the sponsors, Councilor Spector, Paul, Spector, and myself. The first thing we did was we arranged the title slightly of the ordinance. The next thing we did was in section 1.4, we eliminated the exemption for businesses under 2,000 feet for two reasons. For one, it creates a burden of mandating that the city create an inventory of all the applicable businesses, and we wanted to create as new little burden as possible. But also, probably more importantly, in my opinion, is that as a matter of fairness, it should apply equally, and even small businesses contribute to the issue. Sections 2.1 and 2.
Sorry. Do you want to go through all of them and then open discussion, or should we discuss each one?
Why don't I do that? Because I can do this in about 2 minutes, just to give a brief overview. Number 3, sections 2.1 and 2.3, the definition of reusable bag has gone from 3 mils to 1.5 mils, and the reason why is because I did some research. The California plastic ban, the California state law on plastic bag bans does 1.5 mils, and so I used that amount to that thickness to give business owners more flexibility with regard to substitutes. Section 3.1 was simplified by the recommendation of the city solicitor. Section 3.2 and 4.3, those sections were deleted. Section 3.2 is a big change. Its deletion means that this ordinance is now solely about plastic bags. The styrofoam ban piece, the styrofoam ban that mandated biodegradable or compostable replacements is now eliminated, and we can explain why we're proposing that. And so section 2, that's section 3.2, excuse me, that's 3.2, and 4.3 was deleted. Well, section 4.3 was pertained to the styrofoam ban piece and what substances would be mandated in its place. That's gone too.
Counselor, isn't all of 4? Aren't we talking about the entire section?
No.
Or no, they're still.
No.
Okay, I'm sorry. You're right. I'm sorry.
4.3.
Some of the exemptions were. Does anybody have the old ordinance from last time?
Is
You can
is
see
the old one attached to the?
Isn't this the old one?
Yeah, the old one is
Yeah,
attached to the.
yeah. I guess it's in the minutes.
Yeah.
I'm not.
Right, so 4.3 is hospitals and nursing homes. Repackaging.
Yeah, because that doesn't pertain to plastic bags. That pertains to styrofoam. We changed the proposed date of effect from November 1st, 2016 to January 1st, 2016. We can explain why. 8 is minor, very, very minor change. The references to city have been changed to Board of Health in section 7. The last proposed change is that hardship deferment periods have gone from 1 year to 6 months. And that's, it was the hardship deferments in the previous version were 1 year, and you can get up to 2 additional ones, so that's 3 years. We basically cut it down so that there can be a maximum of 1.5 years. And that's because, for various reasons. One is that it seems like, overly long time to be giving businesses till 2019 to comply. But also, I think a lot of businesses don't really have that much of an issue with this ordinance. But anyhow, that's my overview, and we can open it up now to questions and comments.
I'll make a comment. I mean, certainly the most significant change here is that we've cut this ordinance essentially, in half. And we've dropped one big piece, which is on the whole compostable use. And the reason for that, there's a number of reasons for it. One of the key reasons is first of all, most towns and cities, when they've passed, I'm going to call it styrofoam, even though it's not the scientific name, polystyrene, that when they've passed these bans, they basically just banned the use of polystyrene.
Mhm.
What has happened in the meantime is that the substitutes, on many levels, on an environmental chart of a multiple of categories, that on some of those categories, they're actually worse than using the styrofoam. And one of the key ones on those is that many of the substitutes are far worse in terms of their carbon footprint and the amount of energy it takes to produce them. So when you start looking at that just as a strict ban, so you ban styrofoam,
Right.
then the environmental benefit of doing that is really a debate, whether it is overall, given all the various components of it. That's why we initially said it should not be a ban on styrofoam. What we should do is say there would be a requirement to use compostable materials for everybody. That was the part of the ordinance where we've actually had feedback, and we've had feedback about how that would be a difficult thing for some of the businesses in town to abide by in terms of the financial cost. And in fact, as we looked into it, it became true that that was true. For example, there are a number of businesses that package sandwiches. So one of the things would be, well, okay, you buy a sandwich and it shouldn't come in a styrofoam container or whatever you're buying at the takeout. Well, what happens with somebody like Rich Cooper, Cooper's Corner, who produces a sandwich the hour before but puts it out so you can see what it is? Because it's not just a sandwich, it may have a bag of potato chips in there, pickles and coleslaw, and there are a number of folks who are running establishments who do this, and that's a plastic container that you can see through. Wouldn't fit our ordinance. You wouldn't be able to do that, and others wouldn't be able to do that. The problem for them is, at that point, is that's going to have to actually change their operation about how they produce their takeout stuff. Because unlike going to, say, the co-op, which abides by already, is working under what would be under this ordinance, everything they use is biodegradable and compostable. You walk through the line, you take your container, you're the one who makes whatever you're going to make. You put the hot food or the cold food in that container, you know what it is, you close it up, you don't need to see it. On other establishments, it did seem to make sense when we heard that that would become difficult for them to operate where you have a closed container. It really changes what the customer is buying. So we looked at, ways around that. We tried to talk about, well, how do we kind of say, well, all right, it's okay to do that, but it's not okay at the takeout counter for some other business to not be able to do that. And it became very difficult to think about how you actually write that. The other thing was, well, we could say to people, well, you can apply for a hardship ordinance, but it turned out it's much more common than we initially thought in terms of not just that, but then it started raising a number of other issues. And it started being, well, maybe this is a reason why we would have been the first community in Massachusetts to initiate this. Now, my own personal feeling as co-sponsor is that I would like to see this at some point, have the council look at an ordinance like this. It's just that to combine the two, when one of them, which is initially we thought when we go back to the history of where this came from about a year ago, it looked like a styrofoam ban was the easy thing to do. Many communities in Massachusetts have done it. Our neighbors have done it in Amherst. It passes. It doesn't seem to have a lot of opposition. It seems to go very smoothly. There's not a lot of enforcement to it. So that was our initial, okay, we'll go ahead and we'll do that. Then we added in the single-use plastic bag piece because the European Union, 340 million or so people, have a ban on single-use plastic bags. California, just about, 6 months ago, has banned single-use plastic bags. China is banning single-use plastic bags. So suddenly I was like, wait a minute, seems to be passing all over the place, and it's becoming something that our state legislature has been looking at for a number of years, and we said, let's add this onto it. So now we have the styrofoam ban, we have the single-use plastic bag ban, but then we ran into that controversy, which was pointed, it was very interesting because it was right when we had just started kind of making the rounds of this at the Energy Commission that I introduced how we were going to do this. We hadn't written the ordinance, but we just wanted to talk about it. And that very day was the article in the Boston Globe, which is this massive 10-year study out of the Netherlands on banning styrofoam only and not demanding that the replacement material be compostable and biodegradable. So there it had this thing was suddenly like, this isn't necessarily such a great thing to do on its own. And in fact, we then spoke to the folks at Amherst and they said, yeah, when we passed this ban, we didn't know that. We wish we had passed a compostable and biodegradable ban for products. So then we're left with an interesting dilemma. When we first started this, we're thinking, we want to start off where how we wanted to build consensus as much as possible in the community and kind of start off with the lowest hanging fruit, seemed to be the styrofoam ban. The fruit suddenly changed on us. One of the limbs got heavier. It was the single-use plastic bag. And the other fruit, which was low, has seemed to go up pretty high. And in fact, I have had 0 calls or emails or discussions from anybody about the single-use plastic bag, being they're against it or it's going to create hardship. Whereas the other one, where it was a compostable ordinance, does have a number of people who have concerns about it. That's the long-winded version, which is why we decided let's go back to what I think was our original and very good strategy, which is let's do this in stages and let's start with what will get the most of the community behind us. This will be my last year on the council. I would hope next year I'm over there and I'm encouraging you to pick up the next piece because I think it's good sometimes to do these things in stages. And that's what I would suggest, is that that's why we decided to leave this off this particular ordinance.
A couple of things. One is that the Conservation Commission voted to authorize me to communicate support for the plastic bag ban. Careful to say, not on any other basis than plastic bags are an environmental nuisance and a hazard to wildlife and so forth. That there is a lot of debate about, from a greenhouse gas perspective, in the production of, for instance, compostables, is it actually better for the planet? That there's studies that show it either way. That in fact, producing plastic is not necessarily dirtier from a greenhouse gas standpoint, but it sure is environmentally for the conservation lands that we're responsible for, and the 7 interests of the Wetlands Protection Act that we're responsible for. It's much better not to have these bags out blowing around and getting caught, getting swallowed by animals and so forth. So the first point I want to make is that the Conservation Commission is in support of the ban. The second is that I downloaded from the City of Seattle's website the quick version that they had to represent, because they, effective July 1st, 2012, they banned single-use plastic bags. And it's a very simple one-page visual that makes it easy for people to understand what's required. And so I made a copy of that to bring in as a reference that when this passes, it'd probably be useful to have some similarly easy to digest one-pager to communicate to people what's required.
Thank you. Counselor?
So what you're saying is the other communities that have banned polystyrene, what they replace them with, like clear plastic containers or compostable containers that you can weigh the pros and cons on the production of those in terms of their carbon footprint. So.
The compostable, no, it's that if you demand that you replace them with compostable and biodegradable containers, then there is a definite environmental benefit. If you look at the chart of these 10 different categories, then there's no question. If you don't put that in there, if you don't require what the replacement is, then you look at all the communities that have done this, and it is a very close call in terms of is this beneficial or not, because some of the environmental downsides of using the replacement materials are worse than using the styrofoam.
And we're not ready to put in that it needs to be compostable?
That's a political call that we've been making, and back to my little history, which was, we were initially only going to have one piece to this, which was ban on styrofoam, because of our sense that would have been something you do what's kind of move it up in stages. And so when it looked like the bags were they're now the easier route. If there's the will to go ahead and put this back in, I would advise us not to do that. I would advise us, and there are a couple of reasons. One, in my research now and talking to people like Rich Cooper, coming down the pike are going to be, because there are communities doing this, not in New England, but on the West Coast. As you start to have a market for containers, right now the only folks who are using kind of in a big way are using compostable and biodegradable containers are the Co-op, Whole Foods, and they're kind of leading that, but there's only one or two distributors of that. When Rich looked into getting replacement material that would work for him, it went up from something like 12 to 14% cents per container to something like 75 to 80 cents per container. Now that's a pretty huge jump. I think what we're going to see is very similar to what happened with Dunkin' Donuts on the styrofoam ban. Dunkin' Donuts was kind of one of the big roadblocks, and in some communities I think was effective in stopping the community from even banning the styrofoam. This was back a few years ago. In Amherst, I believe it was like the only real opposition, and they tried to work with it. Well, just in the last 6 months, Dunkin' Donuts corporate headquarters, because Dunkin' Donuts is a franchise, what they do is they put out a book. This is what happens with a lot of the franchises. They'll put out a book of the materials that are available that you can order from X, Y, and Z, and Dunkin' Donuts didn't have alternatives. They now have alternatives in that catalog. I think the same thing we're going to see true. I think this is moving very quickly. I think we're going to see the same thing become true for a lot of the packaging. I think it's kind of just gotten started in a big way in terms of packaging. So that's the reason to kind of wait on this particular piece.
But I agree that we should not let it go and readdress it sometime soon. The example you gave about Rich Cooper and how he packages food, we definitely don't want to be overly burdensome, but I think sometimes it can be our job to say, well, maybe you need to rethink how to package these things. And, I think it's okay for us to push and say sometimes we need to figure out how to do things differently.
I agree, and I just want to say someone like, I don't mean to pick on Rich, actually I'm praising him. He came forward with very much of how could we collaborate on this? What might work on this? It wasn't, he has been great on the single-use plastic bag, for example. And I think he was much more saying, help me here. And so I actually called the Co-op and I called Whole Foods. I talked to their distributors to say, are there substitutes? And so, and kind of thinking, how could he do this? I don't know exactly. And it raised other issues. It wasn't just Rich Cooper's, it's other places too. When, how do you determine, how people are going to change their packaging? So yeah, we need to help them look at other ways, but I think we need to be able to say, here are some alternatives.
Mhm.
They may not be perfect for you. They may not be as great. You may not be able to see the food from every angle. But right now, I don't really see those as options that are available in this particular ordinance, because then we'd have to start to change it in what percent of the packaging has to be compostable and biodegradable. Maybe it has a little window and you can get that for 20 cents rather than the 80 cents, but then that little window is not in the mix. I just don't think it's as simple. And I guess mixing the two was what I think when we have debates about this, what I think when we have the public discussion, what might make it easier is when we're on one topic at a time. That was just our feeling about it. I mean, if we felt a groundswell from you guys and saying, hey, put it back in, I'd reconsider putting it back in.
My sense is that you open it up to a lot of different arguments when you add categories of things to ban. Single-use plastic bag, pretty simple, sets a precedent, establishes a process, and then to add another category at another time. If you lump it all together, I think there's going to be constituencies that will do the research to come up with counter-arguments. So I think it's just probably, I'm not here as a politically sophisticated person, but just as a member of the public, I think you're probably a lot more likely to evoke a resistance if you add categories of things to ban.
Councilor O'Donnell?
Thank you for that clarification. I wanted to ask, so Amherst, their ban is just a straight ban, there's no compostable requirement, okay? And refresh my memory, in the original version of this ordinance, there was a ban and a compostable requirement, is that right?
That's
Yes.
correct.
Okay.
The first draft I ever drafted, which was solely styrofoam, which is about a year ago.
Yeah. Nobody saw it besides us. I think.
Right, it was just straight styrofoam, but that's correct, what you just said.
And so who are some of the other stakeholders? You mentioned Rich Cooper, and in Councilor Adams's letter summarizing your amendments, you mentioned stakeholders. What were the other meetings and conversations that led you to this point?
Well, I talked to,
The chamber meetings.
the chamber meeting was one,
Okay.
Economic Development Committee of the
okay.
chamber,
Right.
who agreed that I think they're going to be behind this. So let me just say one piece about the chamber. When I went to them with both pieces and thinking, the chamber, it's business, my own stereotype of how businesses are going to react, even in Northampton. And I was surprised because on the single-use plastic bag piece, which is what they focused on mostly at that meeting, was they were saying, how about newspapers every day? And those are single-use plastic bags. Why don't we ban those? And how about this? We actually have a reason we didn't put newspapers in there, by the way. And part of that is because we did not want to make this onerous for any business. And we've got a newspaper business, whether it's the Gazette or the Republican or even the New York Times. These businesses are at the margins. Their business practice right now doesn't allow them to deliver papers by putting them on the porch, and they don't paper boys anymore. It's somebody driving by and throwing the paper out. And yeah, we'll have discussions with folks at the Gazette, and I think if there was some alternative, they'd be willing to do that. We don't know what that is right now. And communities that have banned single-use plastic bags, many of them have said there are places where they make exceptions to that. So the chamber was kind of pushing us to look at, there was more like a brainstorm, like what other places can the single-use plastic bags, can we add into this? When it came to the other packaging, a number of them had already known about the fact that just banning styrofoam was very debatable in terms of environmental pluses, and yet had some concerns about a number of issues in terms of doing the compostable piece of, one of them was, who's going to be watching out for this piece? It's much simpler. The single-use plastic bag piece is a much simpler, it's right at the place of sale. It's at the cash register. So just remember that the single-use plastic bag will not apply inside the store. So when you buy produce you can still use the single-use plastic bag. So it's very simple. It's right there at the cash register. When you start getting into this idea of food that is prepared, that's what's the difficult thing, because it's how do you, and we talked about how can we rewrite this in a way that, because it's about prepared food going out, and that's where you start to have like all kinds of, we have debate probably for months about, well, is that a prepared food? Is this a prepared food? Is it just, is it prepared food that you can eat within a certain amount of time? It really raised a lot more questions, and those questions are all legitimate, and I think they should be debated. I just think, as Kevin said, it makes it much easier to do this. I would hate to see this ordinance right now in the single-use plastic bag, which I think we could pass, that somehow it gets held up because we bring it in tandem with the other. So I was just, let's go ahead and do this, and then there are lots of, I think the number of stakeholders that are concerned about the other piece, and a lot of it is the cost of the replacement material. Not to cut it.
Just a kind of general question, I'm just kind of thinking aloud. Rich Cooper's store has a smaller number of, I guess, containers it gives out than, I don't know, what's an example of a store that gives out a huge number of them? I can't think.
Co-op.
I can't think.
The co-op,
Okay, but the
maybe?
co-op, yeah, does right, but they do biodegradable versions of those things. I mean, I know there's not really an appetite to do a fee instead of a ban, but I mean, is there a way of quantifying it so if you use a certain number, then you fall under an exemption, or if we had a fee model, you'd be charged less, but a company that does, like Dunkin' Donuts, right, that's a good example. Dunkin' Donuts has the capacity to buy in volume, and they wouldn't really be hurt by something like this as much as a Rich Cooper store. I don't know if you see what I'm getting at, but is there a logic there to looking at the different kinds of businesses, and could it be made to work in that way, or is that something you just don't want to, just that maybe that's too complicated given the work you've already done on this at this stage?
Well, I'd be hesitant to mandate that businesses have to keep track of their sales, so that if they go over a certain amount, they would have to switch the materials they're using, if that's what you're suggesting. And I'm not sure how they would be able to do that unless they can project pretty accurately their volume of sales in any given year, which may be possible. But I'm not sure if we can even do fees in this state. I don't know of any city or town that's done a fee in this state, and I'm not sure if we can. We may be able to, but I don't know if we
we
can.
certainly can't do it without getting approval from the legislature. We may be able to, but I know we would have to go through permission from the legislature.
So,
Yeah, thank you.
do you have any other comments or questions, discussion?
I want to add a couple of just facts, in case there are thousands of people watching on TV, but just in Northampton, and this is only an estimate, this is, and we can only do this because of, kind of talk to folks who have a couple of the smaller places, like State Street, the Cereals, how many plastic bags, when Gary was using plastic bags, was he using, we tried to extrapolate, so it's not scientific, it's very anecdotal, but our guess would be somewhere around 12 to 15 million plastic bags are used in the single-use plastic bags, are used every year in the city of Northampton. Now, and that would probably make sense. I went back and looked at the California number, divided their population by 40 million, and then went back to Northampton at 30,000. That probably seems like a probably pretty good guess on that. And some of the other things is, I know that everybody's heard about the, what's that used, Texas size plastic floating, turning garbage dump in the Pacific Ocean. You know about that? Just all plastic, and it's all accumulating. And it's some of the estimates are that of that plastic that's in that collection with all of its cousin plastics, that's something like 25 to 30% are single-use plastic bags. And part of it is they're very hard to, they're not easy to dispose of. It seems there's a figure here, so these are just a bunch of statistics, and I'll get them to everybody when we move along, but it seems that that plastic bags, single-use plastic bags, have one of the lowest rates of recycling. So this addresses some of that question of, environmentally, and it's, this is the one area around wildlife. The thing with the other part of this is, if they recycled at the same rate, if they went into landfills at the same rate, and there are recyclable bags, if they were recycled, yeah, but the fact is that only 5% are recycled, incredibly low rate. The other thing about banning single-use plastic bags, and we're seeing this right now, I don't know if you've been to Stop and Shop recently, Stop and Shop has reinstituted, they're kind of pushing people to buy their cloth bags. Because eventually where we need to be, 10 years from down the road, I think, is when we're starting to look at all this packaging, which is a huge amount of energy, carbon footprint, usable. That's where we're really, I think, heading. And that what starts to happen is when you say, okay, you can't get the single-use plastic bag, you can get paper, maybe you charge it. California, by the way, has a 10-cent charge, I think, for the first few years on every bag, paper bag. So they banned the single-use plastic bag. You want a paper bag? It's like 10 cents. That's in their state law. That money is going to the grocer. It's not going back to the state, it's going to the grocer to kind of ease the transition. Well, what will start to happen is what happens now in countries that have banned single-use plastic bags for a while, which is people actually start using cloth bags. And in fact, in Stop and Shop, I think, is it 5 years ago or so, it seems like a while ago, they instituted that program where if they gave you back money, I believe, if you didn't take their bags, and people started bringing in their cloth bags. So on the paper bags, if you didn't take it, you got like 5 cents. And they were pushing, again, selling cloth bags. Northampton actually turned out that I heard that we were at the highest rate of any of their communities, and we hit about 40% of people were bringing their own bags. And that was just in a short-term experiment. So long run, environmentally, that is a huge challenge to be bringing your own bags, number one. And number two, when producers or the owners of stores talk about, well, it's a little more expensive, this is going to cost us a penny or two more a bag, and you start adding hundreds of bags. Well, it's going to eventually, if they do this right, and perhaps even not in a town like Northampton, not even over that long a time span, they might actually be saving money because people are going to bring in their own cloth bags. And they don't tear and rip, and your groceries are dropping on your driveway like mine did yesterday in brick pots. There are a lot of benefits.
Can we talk about the change in thickness? So we basically halved the thickness, right, from
Mhm.
3 mils to 1.5. At 1.5, do you feel like that's thick enough that these bags really will be reused multiple times, or are we kind of risking that they're going to be, if not single use, double use, or?
Well, even at 1.5 mils, they have to be specifically designed for multiple use and made of recyclable plastic. So I'm not really concerned about that. And the reason why I cut it was because the 3 mils, that number came from a proposed ordinance in Greenfield, which never passed. So I mean, they couldn't get the support written the way it was, and it was very lofty. And one of the reasons why is because they did things like like that. So I proposed that change. We proposed that change for that reason. Also, that's what California's is. So it's not. I mean, they looked at the same issue and came up with 1.5 as a thickness that will result in the bags being reused. So I'm comfortable with that.
Do you have any examples of like a 1.5?
No, I want.
That would be good to have as a
yeah.
visual, tactile aid.
I agree.
Kevin, question, does it happen to say on the Seattle weapon? Probably doesn't, because that's a simple
What the
little graphic.
thickness is?
Yeah.
No, because it just bans well, basically all of them. It encourages reusable carry-out bags, but it doesn't say what fabric they have to be made out of. It does say, like California, large paper shopping bags, the kind with handles, are allowed, but there's a mandatory 5-cent charge that goes to the store.
Did any of the stakeholders have anything to say about the thickness of the bags? Did you hear from them, or they were indifferent? They were fine with that?
We haven't heard from them. I mean, we actually have tried to reach out to some of the larger, you know, the
Yeah.
Big Y and Stop and Shop, and they actually have not been, and the chamber did too. We actually talked to the chamber, and they were gonna set up a meeting,
Mhm.
which one of the reasons we waited quite a while was we waited and waited, and we said, that would be great, set up a meeting with these folks, and we'll come in, and we haven't really heard much back, and
Okay.
so.
Yeah, I was just wondering if that was a reaction to a comment you heard in addition to
No,
complying.
we didn't hear
being
any
more in
comments
line
on
with
that.
California.
I can read this if this helps. The best way to understand the thickness of a mill is to use some perspective. Here are some common everyday bags and their associated mill thickness. A grocery store bag is 0.5 mils, a dry cleaning bag is 0.75 mils, a bread bag is 1.5 mils, a freezer bag is 1.75, a retail shopping bag is usually 2 mils.
Did you say a bread bag, so the bag, the plastic bag that loaf of bread, sliced bread comes in is about 1.5? Is that what you just?
That's, yeah, that's, I think that's what that means. Yeah, that's what it says. No further discussion?
Are any of the other amendments as a result of feedback, or are they all just kind of like the exemption for 20, for businesses smaller than 2,000 square feet?
That came from the Board of Health.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
One of their concerns was that, which confused me because, for a couple of reasons. For one, they were concerned about having to enforce this ordinance, which actually creates no new burdens on them at all. And further confused me because, well, I don't understand why the Board of Health would be concerned about that. That's completely unrelated to health. But I thought the point was well taken as a matter of fairness. So so that's why there was some feedback that led to that change.
On that point, you mentioned the Board of Health. What do you make of the fact that the South Hadley Board of Health unilaterally banned styrofoam? I believe it was this month or late last month. I think it was the first community in the Commonwealth to do it through the Board of Health.
Well,
And did they do it as an outright ban, do you know, or was there?
I don't know if they did an outright ban. I can understand that because I think one of the main concerns about styrofoam are the health issues,
Yeah.
the off-gassing from the styrofoam. I mean, that's one, and
Yeah.
the second one is the amount of space it takes up in your landfill. So those are two of the key ones.
Mhm.
Again, then you have the other side of what are you replacing it with? And I'm not sure what, I don't think, they're not asking for, they're just, again, they're back to where we were, which was
Right.
banning something, not saying what the items should be that you
Right.
use.
That is,
But I do understand how a Board of Health could step in and say, look,
I
and
think
then
none-
someone else can come in and say, now it's our job to talk about what materials should be
and
used, which is
further,
different.
set further rules.
Yeah, set further
Right.
rules.
Yeah.
I
Mhm.
think there are communities I've read, I believe, where the Board of Health has taken the lead on the plastic bag ban. So I was extremely disappointed in the Board of Health because I don't think the department understands that this creates no new burden. There's no new inspection mandates on this. That's really important for them to know. I guess they must have missed that.
What is the role of the Board of Health generally in this ordinance versus the Department of Health, which I assume the Department of Health?
I
as we
switched it
discussed
off.
last time. I'm sorry, no, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but the Department of Health would enforce the fine, but they would have no responsibility for inspections.
Correct. It'd be based on, complaint based.
Okay. To the Board of Health. or to the Department of Health?
The department. I switched all the language to the department.
So there's nothing in here that has anything to do with the Board of Health?
No, the Board of Health, well, that's correct, that's correct. It's all the health department now.
Okay. Didn't you say we replaced the word city with Board of Health? Or
Right,
is
but
that
it's
also
really-
Department of Health?
Department of Health or Health Department. Yeah, they're the enforcement authority under the ordinance, which is common in these sorts of ordinances. And they grant deference as well.
Mr. Chairman, I have to leave, but I'm pretty sure I can find the web page, and I'll communicate that instead of just leaving a copy of this. So-
Actually, could you leave it with?
Oh, sure.
Perhaps she could make it available as one of the documents from this meeting?
Okay,
Thank you.
good, sure, absolutely.
So one of the side questions on this, and we can come back to any other details on the ordinance itself, is I had suggested to the chair that this committee be the host committee for the public hearing. And wanted to run that by you.
Sounds like an appropriate venue.
Thank you.
Sure, thanks. So like a number of these will change. And the open meeting law, it would be a council-sponsored meeting, so all the councilors would be invited, because it would be the council sponsoring a vote. Our chair would chair that meeting, we would be up here. Okay.
Are there any other discussion?
Counselor Adams, I see on the city's website that the Board of Health is taking up this ordinance tomorrow at their Board of Health meeting. I don't think that they know that there's been revisions.
Okay.
Do you want me to communicate that to them?
If this passes as amended, please.
Okay, so,
If this committee sends it forward with a positive
As amended.
As amended, with a positive recommendation, if you could do that, I'd really appreciate
Okay.
it. Thank you. All right, is there any further discussion?
I guess just what prompted the change, the deferment change? Did you say this already?
I
Is
think
it time
that, well, for me, you know, if we give 3 years worth of potential deferments, the state law could have been long past, hopefully, maybe not, but hopefully long past by that point. And that was, you know, we some of the things we really relaxed in this ordinance, the thickness, dumping the entire styrene part. And, you know, instead of just
No
making
pun
it,
intended.
right. And, you know, so instead of just, you know, it's compromised. So the date of effect is gonna be sooner. The deferments are, I think, still extremely generous if businesses were to take advantage of them. But, no, it's all compromised. Further discussion?
So I'd like to move that we send this forward as amended with a positive recommendation to this committee.
Second.
Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Okay. Is there any new business for this committee? Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?